Hello, how's it going? Still a little warm. So I've been down in Virginia for the last week, about the last week, and it's driving me crazy. Um, I'm sort of stand still down here, and it's not Virginia, it's just the situation. I just spend too much time in the hospital for too much time with people who, my dad, my mom, who don't really care about time anymore. It's like, yeah, like I said in an earlier video, it's like the Magic Mountain, where it's just time just kind of loses all meaning when I'm down here. And for somebody who needs structure and routine and even a little accomplishment, so much it's like making the bed here. Um, it just it's the worst thing in the world for me, and it's just it's totally aggravating because my dad's kind of lost about 3 or 4 steps. And I don't know who's going to be the first to go. So between my mom and my dad, so there's that. A little ray of sunshine. Start your Monday off. Um, uh, and one of the things I was thinking about last night is that, like, I like to think of myself as a rational thinker. All my decisions, I've sort of taken rational steps in, and then I started thinking about it. I was like, do people actually do this, or do they just sort of this is something that they say they do? And I started answering. He's like, I said yes and no. I mean, let's put it like this. I mean, we like to say, for example, you come to a fork in the road, and you can only see down the road a little bit. Maybe half a mile, depends on what's around, right? Sometimes you can see really far, and sometimes you can't see anything because there's lots of trees or I don't know, dark out. So we can only see so far down the road, so we can only think about things in a couple steps. So in a step is just like we do this and then this happens. You have 2 options or 3 options, and you take one of those and then some more options. It's almost like a choose your own adventure book. If if ever read those from, I think they were back in the 80s. And so if you try to think about these things rationally, you can say, okay, what is the probability if I go, say, for example, like me, I have a job interview tomorrow on Skype or Zoom or whatever the hell it is, and I I don't know how in love I am with the job, but it's a job. I think it's a job I can do, um, and I'm not getting a lot of attention in the job market. So this is probably the best chance I have of getting a job. However, the job that I don't want. I won't say don't want. It's not a dream job, if you know what I mean. It's an income. It's a paycheck. Um, so you kind of have to think, well, what's the probability of if I do get the job? What's the probability of something better being out there and soon? I do have bills to pay, and my bill's getting tighter and tighter and tighter, and it's not just because I'm losing weight, which actually does help on the grocery bill, but I'm not going to starve to death. So you can only think about these things so far, and the thing is, you can try to understand, like, okay, what's the probability of something better being out there that I can get really quickly? And past experience kind of predicts the future a little bit. It doesn't always. I mean, this is sort of an all or nothing thing where you don't have a job and then suddenly you do. So it's hard to determine probability. So in that case, I would say as far as rational decisions are concerned, um, when I said yes and no, I said for yes, you can sort of examine things, but no, you can't really. People don't make rational decisions largely because the probabilities of what you're trying to determine. So if you think what's the probability of a better job out there, well, um, you don't know. I mean, that's the thing, is that the probabilities um, are very hard to determine, and the further down the road you look, the harder it is to determine. It's not only the probabilities are harder to determine, even the choices down the road that you're going to be forced to make or you will be confronted with, um, or you don't even know what those are, let alone what the probability of their possible outcomes will be. So you can only be rational up until a point, but then at some point where you can't be rational, you have to start being irrational and just saying, oh, you know, almost like flip a coin or just kind of go with whatever's easier, or if you rely on social norms or expectations to guide you along, that might not be rational. It might be sort of maybe upfront rational, but long term it's not very rational, because other people are making the decisions for you, and so you're only being rational about being lazy or not having to make a decision. Um, so this kind of brings up a point of, from a book called The Myth of the Rational Voter by an economist named Brian Kaplan, who is, I think he's still out of George Mason, which is where I got my undergrad degree in economics. And he basically says that he has this idea of, I don't know if it's his, but he's talked about it more than anybody else I've seen. It's called irrationality. And so the concept is essentially it's very taxing uh, to be rational and calculating up to a certain point. So if you're making a decision about what job to take and that, I don't think it's super taxing. It is kind of difficult, and it does maybe cause you a bit of stress, but you can see the consequences of it almost immediately, right? Or some of them are a little longer term, but um, you make your decision based on the rational facts and you go forward. But in some cases, it's very, you have to sort of think of things as sort of a cost benefit analysis in making rational decisions. So if it's very costly to be rational, and it's not costly to be irrational, and that's the cost side. Um, and then the benefit is like the benefit's marginal. Why would you go through all of, say for example you're voting for who you want to be president? Well, what are the chances of your vote actually making the difference? So in a sense, if you're what they would call the swing vote or the median voter, everybody's looking at you. They added up all the votes and it all ends up it's all looking at you. Everybody's made their decision except for you, and it's even. And so you can look at things and say, well, what are the chances of me actually, like going through and doing all this research? Is it going to be worth it when I don't know what's going to happen? Politicians are famous for lying, so whatever they say might not come to pass. And then often the politicians, they're also not um, clairvoyant, so they don't see the future. So they don't, you kind of have to trust their instinct on this. And sometimes you can't even do that because it's not always just up to them. The circumstances kind of drive things rather than principles or, good having a good team around you to help you make wise decisions. Sometimes it's just crazy crap happens and you have to deal with it. And so it's actually rational not to spend all your time trying to decide who to vote for, because chances are you'll not be in a situation where you're going to have to be the deciding vote. The chances are that even if you were in that situation, all that information and time and energy that you've gone through is not going to matter in the slightest. So if you spend hours upon hours uh, reading newspapers and online articles and going into discussion groups and doing research on different topics, are probably not going to amount to anything. Um, so it's actually kind of rational not to waste your time on this stuff if it doesn't matter. So you've taken a cost benefit analysis and you've just decided, I'm not going to bother with this because it's not going to matter in the slightest anyway. Um, um, and then, so basically, once you've reached that point where it no longer pays to be rational, you just switch off the rationality and you just decide to go either with your instincts, your desires, your principles, and perhaps even just flipping a coin and just letting fate decide it. Um, and that's more rational because it doesn't matter to you anyway. And there's also this concept in the book where basically uh, you kind of we're sort of prone to being having biases. And there's certain I won't go through it. I haven't read the book in a few years, but this concept of rational irrationality um, has always stuck with me, and saying like it's just not worth it to worry about it too much, especially if the likelihood of it actually mattering is so tiny. Um, so often, what happens is when we decide to be rational, we sort of are irrational. We just decide that we're just going to go with this decision, the hell with it, and we'll deal with the consequences. And then, interestingly enough, we don't really like to do things without reason. So we sort of invent reasons after the fact. So you make a decision, I'm going to vote for so and so in the election because I feel like I should vote for something, and it's not going to be too costly for me to go vote for something. I feel patriotic when I vote, but I don't really care, to worry about things. So I kind of, you're inventing reasons, right? You're using, okay, I'm voting because uh, I'm patriotic, or I'm voting because it gives the process a lot more credibility, which can go along with uh, patriotism. When nobody votes, not a very credible election, because who does this guy speak for? Just the voters who voted for him. And if it's only a tiny percentage of the population and most people stay at home, you don't really have a mandate if only a few people want you. It's just that nobody else wanted anybody else anyway. Um, so, we just kind of like rationalize things. And I know that we shouldn't even use the word rational in this discussion because it just kind of confuses the subject. I would say that essentially um, you justify your decision on irrational terms, um, even though you're sort of in your right to be irrational. So, and then when we decide make decisions like this, like for example, uh, if you've ever been in a situation where you're interested in two different women, or interested in living in a certain part of the country, um, you often are sort of forced into this situation, which goes along with rationality and irrationality. Is basically what your heart wants and what your mind wants, and what the difference is. So, thing can be sort of rationalized or justified intellectually. It's hard to measure what that means. How is something more rational than something else? Um, Especially if you don't have any way to measure, your data. Like I said earlier, like you're sort of estimating the probability of things happening, and you don't know how good you are at that. I mean, obviously, if I were very good at the probability, estimating probability, I'd be a very rich man. And it's very difficult to understand, measure what is rational and what is irrational, and uh, then compare them across. How do you compare something that is correct but it's irrational? So the Greeks often would call this right opinion. You just happen to be correct this one time. Maybe it's like the a stop clock is right twice a day kind of thing, which is better than getting it right. Might be better than getting it rationally. At least using your faculties, especially when uh, it's an all or nothing type thing. It often gets confusing when you're talking about the difference between what your heart wants and what your mind wants. And so let's put it like this. I mean, uh, when you make a decision and you say, "Do I go with my gut, my heart, whatever?" Say, for example, you you a job, for example, or living in a situation, or a woman, something like that, where you have to make a decision to go with Sally or Jesse. Maybe not Sally, Jesse. Let's say, Anna and Susan, right? And on paper, Anna looks great. She's attractive and that, but something about Susan makes you just crazy, and just does it for you. And you know, you can sit there and intellectualize this decision over and over again. Um, and okay, she comes from a good family. Uh, she, her head's on straight and all that, but there's not that sort of irrationality that of love or magic or chemistry or whatever you want to call it you have with the other girl. And so you kind of have to ask yourself, do I want what I want? I really want what I want, or do I really should I go with what I want, or should I go with the thing that's a rational decision? So in big cases of a job, I take the job because it pays well and I need money, or do I go with, do I marry this woman because circumstances are going to be much more favorable in my cause, or do I go with my heart? It's a fun job. It's not going to pay very much, but God, I love it. And this woman, it's just I feel alive when I'm with her, and we'll just figure it out. And she's not completely crazy, but she does it for me. Well, is it paid to be rational about situations like that? And when you make this decision, you should have like a sort of a background question saying like, you make your decisions based on, as far as love is concerned, or job, or where you live, based on rational decision or rational input. Because at some point we like to think of ourselves as rational people, but when we do things that are irrational, we kind of, I'm not a rational person if I do irrational things, right? So we might do the rational thing out of just because we're in love with the idea of being rational. And so, it could be harmful to your view of yourself, and you're basically destroying the thing that you've tried to be for so long, um, or the image you have with other people who, oh, he's a rational guy, but he just did something completely irrational. And so doing the opposite of what's rational often destroys that image of you within you and in others. Or it might even destroy the reality of rationality. I mean, so the thing is, like, you're no longer rational because you made a giant decision that wasn't very rational. Whether or not you're happy is another issue. So that was just something I was thinking about. Um, um, and I really haven't come to any conclusion, but I just have to say, like, irrationality is not sort of the end all be all. And as far as economists are concerned, we know that people are not very rational. They're rational up until a point, and then they rely on social pressure, gut instinct, base desires, flipping a coin, randomness, anything to take away the pain of being rational, which is very costly. It's taxing, it's difficult, it takes a long time, and usually you never really get a proper answer anyway. So, answer the question again, yes and no. So, all right, I'll see you soon. Bye.